Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. was born on the 8th of November 1945 in Bath, New York, to Kathleen K. Louise DeGroat and Joseph James D'Angelo Sr., who served as a sergeant in the United States Army. He grew up in a household with two sisters and a brother and had partial Italian heritage. Reports suggest that his early home environment was strict and unstable, with accounts describing harsh parenting and controlling behavior. Between 1959 and 1960, he attended Mills Junior High School in Rancho Cordova, California. In 1961, he enrolled at Folsom High School. Although he did not complete a traditional diploma, he later earned a General Educational Development Certificate in 1964. During this time, he participated in junior varsity baseball, showing some involvement in school activities, despite challenges in his personal life. According to official records presented later, his teenage years included various unlawful activities. These reports mention incidents such as break-ins, male-related offenses, and troubling behavior toward animals. These claims were documented during legal proceedings as part of his early background. This stage of his life outlines his upbringing, education, and early behavioral patterns before adulthood. The combination of family environment, schooling, and reported juvenile conduct provides a structured overview of his formative years. The available information about this period remains limited to documented records and does not extend beyond verified accounts. These details help describe the conditions, experiences, and behaviors associated with him before he entered military service and continued his education and professional training. Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. entered adulthood by joining the United States Navy in September 1964. He served for 22 months during the Vietnam War as a damage controlman aboard the USS Canberra and later the USS Piedmont. His time in the military marked his transition into structured environments where he received technical training and experience. In August 1968, he enrolled at Sierra College in Rocklin, California, where he studied police science and graduated with honors. He later continued his education at Sacramento State University in 1971, earning a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. His academic path also included postgraduate coursework and additional police training at the College of the Sequoias in Visalia. During this period, he completed a 3-2-week internship with the Roseville Police Department, gaining practical experience in law enforcement. In May 1973, he joined the Exeter Police Department as a burglary unit officer after relocating from Citrus Heights. He remained there until August 1976, then moved to Auburn and continued working as a police officer until July 1979. During this time, he was involved in a shoplifting incident involving a hammer and dog repellent, which led to a 6-month probation. Following this event, he was dismissed from his position in October 1979. During the process, records indicate he made serious verbal threats toward the police chief and was later reported to have engaged in concerning behavior near the chief's residence. These incidents marked the end of his law enforcement career. His personal life also developed during these years. In May 1970, he became engaged to Bonnie Jean Caldwell, a nursing student and fellow classmate at Sierra College. The relationship ended in 1971, with reports describing controlling and unhealthy behavior. After the breakup, there were allegations that he attempted to pressure her into continuing the relationship using intimidation. In November 1973, he married Sharon Marie Huddle in Auburn. The couple settled in Citrus Heights and later spent time in Long Beach during the 1980s. They had 3 daughters, 2 born in Sacramento and 1 in Los Angeles. While Huddle built a career as a divorce attorney, the couple separated in 1991, and many years later, following his arrest, Huddle filed for divorce, which was finalized the next year. During the 1980s, his employment was not clearly documented, though it is suspected he worked in technical and service roles from 1990 until his retirement in 2017. He worked as a truck mechanic at a Save Mart supermarket's distribution center in Roseville. Neighbors reported that he frequently engaged in loud and profane outbursts, sometimes directing threats toward others. One account described a message in which he threatened to deliver a load of death in response to a barking dog. Despite these behaviors, members of his family stated that they did not suspect him of committing serious crimes. His eldest daughter described him as a perfect father, and his wife accepted explanations for his absences from home. These documented details present a structured account of his personal relationships, family environment, and daily life, without extending beyond recorded information. They reflect how his domestic life continued over many years while he maintained employment and routine activities. The available records indicate that his family life appeared stable to those around him, with no outward acknowledgement of criminal involvement. These elements complete the overview of his personal and family circumstances during the years in which these events occurred. No additional details are included beyond what has been documented in records regarding his personal life. Joseph James DeAngelo was linked to a series of crimes between 1974 and 1975 inches, Visalia, California, later referred to as the Visalia ransacker phase. During this period, he was believed to have committed approximately 120 burglaries and 1 murder over a span of about 20 months. The recorded activity began in March 1974, when small amounts of money were taken from homes, including coins from piggy banks. These incidents followed a consistent pattern involving unlawful entry into residential properties. The burglaries were characterized by specific methods. Entry was often attempted through windows or multiple access points. Window screens were removed and sometimes placed inside bedrooms. Items within homes were disturbed, scattered, or rearranged. Low-value objects, such as coins, stamps, and small personal belongings were taken, while higher value items were often left untouched. In several cases, objects were positioned near doors or entryways, possibly serving as warning signals. The suspect also moved through neighborhoods using fences, pathways, and open spaces, leaving multiple escape routes. On the 11th of September 1975, a significant escalation occurred during an incident at the home of Claude Snelling. He confronted an intruder attempting to abduct his daughter and was shot twice. He later died from his injuries. The assailant fled the scene after the confrontation. Later that year, during a police stakeout, Detective William McGowan encountered a masked suspect. The individual initially appeared to surrender, but then fired a weapon and escaped. Evidence collected at the scene included items believed to have been carried by the suspect. At the time, there was no DNA evidence linking these crimes to a specific individual. Years later, law enforcement agencies stated that investigative findings connected these incidents to D'Angelo. While the statutes of limitations prevented prosecution for the burglaries, the murder case was later formally charged and pursued through the legal system. Joseph James D'Angelo moved to the Sacramento area in 1976, where his criminal activity escalated from burglary to a series of sexual assaults and additional murders. During this period, he committed at least 51 rapes across multiple communities, including Carmichael, Citrus Heights, and Rancho Cordova. These attacks were typically carried out in residential neighborhoods located near open spaces such as creeks, trails, and schools, which allowed for quick entry and escape. His methods involved careful surveillance of targeted areas. Victims often reported seeing or hearing a prowler before an attack occurred. Investigators determined that he conducted reconnaissance by observing homes, entering properties in advance, and sometimes making phone calls to potential victims to learn their routines. In some cases, he entered homes prior to attacks to unlock windows, unload firearms, or place items that would later be used during the crimes. On the 18th of December 1976, a documented case involved a 15-year-old victim who was alone at home. The assailant entered the residence, threatened her with a weapon, and controlled the environment for several hours. The sequence of events included repeated assaults, movement between rooms, and periods where the victim was left restrained before being moved again. After the incident, the victim freed herself and sought help from neighbors. His established pattern included entering homes at night, awakening occupants with a flashlight, and threatening them with a firearm. Victims were bound using ligatures such as shoelaces, blindfolded, and gagged. In cases involving couples, he forced one victim to restrain the other before separating them. He often placed objects on the male victim to detect movement and threatened violence if disturbed. The female victim was then assaulted repeatedly. Over time, his targets shifted from individuals to couples, reflecting an evolution in his approach. During some attacks, he made repeated statements referencing a person named Bonnie. These crimes were carried out with consistency in method, supported by surveillance, control of victims, and repeated patterns of behavior documented by investigators across multiple incidents during this period. Joseph James DeAngelo committed serial murders in Southern California between 1979 and 1986. During this period, he carried out attacks across Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Orange counties, with at least 10 murders recorded in this region. The geographic spread of his crimes reflected movement across multiple jurisdictions, extending his earlier criminal activity into Southern California. Alongside these murders, he was linked to more than 50 rapes across several counties, along with hundreds of related offenses, including theft, vandalism, stalking, and prowling. Investigators connected multiple cases through DNA evidence that linked him to several of the murders, while additional cases were associated through similar modus operandi patterns. These patterns included consistent methods of entry, control of victims, and repeated behavioral signatures observed across different locations. The investigation also documented that he made repeated attempts to communicate with victims and law enforcement. These communications included taunting phone calls and possible written messages intended to intimidate and provoke response from authorities. The nature of these communications suggested ongoing interaction between the offender and investigative efforts during this period. His criminal activity during these years represented an expansion of earlier patterns into a broader geographic area within California. Law enforcement agencies compiled evidence across multiple jurisdictions to establish connections between incidents that occurred over several years. These investigative efforts were supported by forensic analysis and comparative review of crime scene characteristics across the affected regions. The overall scope of his actions during this period demonstrated a sustained pattern of serious violent crime across Southern California. This phase of activity is documented as part of the broader investigation into his criminal history. No additional details beyond the recorded information are included in this summary, maintaining strict adherence to documented facts. The case files reflect multiple overlapping investigations conducted during and after the period of these crimes. These investigations contributed to later understanding of the offender's methods and geographic patterns across California. The documented evidence remained central to linking multiple incidents attributed to the same offender across different counties and years. This body of information formed a key part of the broader historical record of the case. All descriptions remain limited to documented investigative findings and recorded case materials from the period. No speculative information is included beyond the established record of events. The documented scope of crimes remains focused on verified data across multiple jurisdictions, providing a consolidated account of the investigative record available files. Joseph James DeAngelo became the focus of renewed investigative attention following key DNA developments beginning in 2001. In that year, forensic analysis linked the East Area Rapist and original Night Stalker cases, unifying them under the ERONS designation. This development expanded the role of DNA databases in California, which were increasingly used to solve cold cases across multiple jurisdictions. In 2016, the FBI announced a renewed nationwide effort, offering a monetary reward for information that could lead to identification. Investigators later applied forensic genetic genealogy techniques, using family DNA connections to narrow down potential suspects in the case. This method ultimately identified D'Angelo through genetic links to relatives, marking a major breakthrough in the long-running investigation. On the 24th of April 2018, he was arrested at age 72, bringing decades of investigation to a formal conclusion. Authorities formally connected his identity to earlier crimes, including those attributed to the Visalia ransacker investigation phase. The linkage of multiple cases through DNA evidence significantly changed the direction of the investigation and allowed law enforcement agencies to unify previously separate case files. This consolidation helped investigators compare crime scenes, behavioral patterns, and forensic data across several counties in California. The ERINS designation became a central reference point for coordinating investigations across different law enforcement agencies. These combined efforts continued for years as new forensic technologies improved the ability to analyze preserved DNA evidence. The use of forensic genetic genealogy ultimately provided investigators with a pathway to identify suspects through distant familial connections. This breakthrough led directly to narrowing the suspect pool and focusing investigative resources on D'Angelo's family line. Following extensive surveillance and confirmation steps, investigators prepared for the final phase of identification and arrest operations. These coordinated actions culminated in his arrest in 2018, officially closing one of California's longest-running investigations. On the 21st of November 1987, 19-year-old Kathy Carol Bonney was killed by her father, Thomas Lee, Tom Bonney, in Camden County, North Carolina. Tom Bonney left the family home shortly after 7 p.m. with Kathy, allegedly to look at a truck for sale. Kathy's sister, Susan, later saw them at a nearby 7-Eleven before they drove away together. According to Tom Bonney, they crossed from Virginia into North Carolina during the trip. He stated an argument occurred over her romantic relationship. Kathy allegedly swore at her father and reached for a firearm in the vehicle. Bonney claimed the gun discharged during struggle, causing flashback and Demian taking control. He stated, "Demian took control and he shot Kathy 27 times. Gunfire struck her head, torso, and legs, and she was dumped near the Dismal Swamp Canal in Camden County, just across the state line from Chesapeake, Virginia." About 2 hours later, Tom Bonney returned alone and asked if anyone knew Kathy's whereabouts. She was last seen leaving with her father that evening before the investigation began the following day. Tom Bonney later maintained his account of events involving an argument, a struggle, and the claimed actions of a second personality statement continued. Thomas Lee Bonney lived in Chesapeake, Virginia, where he operated an auto salvage yard. He was married to Dorothy May Bonney, and together they had 6 children, with Kathy Carroll Bonney being the eldest, born on the 6th of August 1968. Another older child mentioned in the case is Susan Christine Bonney, born in 1972. According to defense accounts, Tom Bonney's childhood was marked by physical abuse by his father. This history of trauma was later presented as part of his psychological background during legal proceedings. He was also described by those around him as having complex emotional and behavioral patterns, including mood swings and difficulties with memory. Family members, particularly Susan Bonney, described Tom Bonney as strict and controlling. He reportedly did not allow his children to date, maintaining a highly restrictive household environment. His behavior was also described as increasingly unstable, with indications of emotional volatility. A former business partner also observed unusual traits in Bonney's behavior, including poor memory and mood fluctuations, particularly related to religious topics. Around the period leading up to Kathy's death, this individual also noted that Bonney was acting strangely. Additionally, Bonney was described having a complicated emotional relationship with his father, a love-hate dynamic. On the evening of the 21st of November 1987, Tom Bonney left home with his daughter Kathy under the pretense of going to inspect a truck for sale. Kathy's sister, Susan Bonney, later observed them together at a nearby 7-Eleven store in a vehicle. Shortly afterward, they drove away together. Tom Bonney later stated that they traveled across the North Carolina state border during the course of the evening. According to his account, an argument developed between him and Kathy concerning her romantic partner. During this confrontation, Kathy allegedly used profanity toward him and reached for a firearm that was present in the vehicle. Bonney claimed that the firearm discharged during this interaction and that the event triggered a psychological reaction linked to his past trauma. He described experiencing a flashback to childhood abuse and stated that an alternate personality known as Demian took control of his actions at that moment. Following this claimed psychological episode, Tom Bonney stated that he shot his daughter multiple times. After the incident, he disposed of her body along the Dismal Swamp Canal in Camden County. After approximately 2 hours away from home, Bonney returned alone. Upon arrival, he asked family members whether anyone knew Kathy's whereabouts. His other daughter, Susan, subsequently went to search for Kathy at the 7-Eleven location, but found no sign of her. Tom Bonney did not participate in the search efforts at that time later. On the morning of the 22nd of November 1987, Tom Bonney reported his daughter, Kathy, missing to the Chesapeake Police Department. He repeated his version of events, stating that he had taken Kathy to meet a man named John, who allegedly intended to sell a Chevrolet Blazer. According to his statement, Kathy went on a test drive around 9 p.m. and did not return. Bonney claimed he did not immediately suspect foul play, explaining that Kathy had previously stayed out overnight. Police informed him that because Kathy was an adult, a formal missing person report could only be filed after 24 hours. Later that same day, shortly before 7 p.m., Bonnie contacted police again, reporting that Kathy was still missing. An officer visited the Bonnie residence, where Tom Bonnie repeated his account of the previous night's events. During this early stage of the investigation, Bonnie maintained consistent claims that Kathy had left with a potential buyer and never returned. He also assisted police in preparing a composite sketch of the alleged suspect involved in the car sale scenario. For several weeks following Kathy's disappearance, Bonnie continued to uphold this version of events. However, investigators began to identify inconsistencies in his statements, including variations in his account of which vehicle he had driven on the night in question. These inconsistencies would later become significant in the investigation. This marked a turning point in the investigation, as suspicion began to shift toward inconsistencies in Bonnie's narrative. Over time, and growing investigative concern emerged. Later, authorities. Kathy Bonnie's nude body was discovered on the 22nd of November 1987, around 3 p.m. on the outskirts of Elizabeth City, near the Dismal Swamp Canal, along U.S. Route 17 inches, Camden County. The location was just across the state line from Chesapeake, Virginia. A blood-stained undergarment with a torn bottom was found near her body. Her face had been severely disfigured, and identification was only possible through fingerprint analysis. The autopsy revealed that Kathy had sustained of 27 gunshot wounds, affecting her head, torso, and legs. Forensics examination found no evidence of sexual activity. The bloodstains found on clothing near the body matched Kathy's blood type. Additional items of interest included a letter addressed to her lover, adult magazines, and a pair of handcuffs discovered in her room during the investigation. The combination of forensic evidence established the severity and nature of the attack, confirming multiple gunshot wounds and post-mortem injury present here. During the investigation, law enforcement identified several inconsistencies in Tom Bonnie's statements. He gave conflicting accounts regarding which vehicle he had driven on the night of November 21, sometimes stating it was a wrecker and at other times claiming it was a Chevrolet. Bonnie also made contradictory claims regarding firearms. He stated that a .22 caliber sawed-off rifle had been stolen a week before Kathy's disappearance, and that he had sold a 9-shot .22 revolver. These statements complicated the investigation into the weapon used in the crime. Further inconsistencies emerged when Bonnie sold his Chevrolet shortly after Kathy disappeared. However, he later reported seeing the same vehicle again a few days later, leading police to seize it for examination. In December 1987, Susan Bonnie informed police that she had seen bloodstains in her father's car on the night Kathy disappeared. She also stated that she feared her father. Forensic testing confirmed bloodstains matching Kathy's blood type, along with traces of her hair found in the rear and trunk of the Chevrolet. These findings directly linked the vehicle to Kathy Bonnie and contradicted earlier explanations provided by Tom Bonney. The accumulation of inconsistent statements and physical evidence played a significant role in advancing the investigation toward suspicion of foul play involving a family member. Investigators continued reviewing all statements as suspicion increasingly focused on inconsistencies within Bonney's accounts and supporting physical evidence collected during the ongoing inquiry process. On the 11th of December 1987, Tom Bonney fled after increasing suspicion in the investigation. During this period, his wife Dorothy Bonney went into hiding due to fear of him. Social services officials intervened and took custody of the couple's other children. Tom Bonney was eventually apprehended on the 31st of January 1988 in Indianapolis. Following his arrest, he was transported back to North Carolina. At the time of his capture, he did not resist police. Earlier in the proceedings, Bonney had also made a failed escape attempt during transport to court. He managed to jump from a vehicle while still handcuffed and ran approximately 50 feet before being recaptured. These events reflected escalating instability in the case following Kathy's death and the growing legal pressure surrounding the investigation. His arrest marked the end of the initial fugitive phase of the case and transitioned the proceedings into psychological evaluation and trial preparation. These developments showed increasing instability in the investigation and the family situation as law enforcement continued to build its case based on inconsistent statements and collected evidence, while Bonney's status shifted from suspect to fugitive and then to custody, marking a critical transition point in the case from initial inquiry to formal legal proceedings and psychological evaluation stages that would follow after his arrest, and return to North Carolina for further processing and investigation during ongoing case. Development and review process phase. In July 1988, Tom Bonney underwent psychological evaluation with Dr. Paul Dell. Dell diagnosed him with dissociative identity disorder, DID, post-traumatic stress disorder, and mixed personality disorder. According to Dell, these conditions were linked to childhood trauma experienced after the death of Bonney's grandmother when he was 10 years old. Using hypnosis during interviews, Dell identified 10 separate personality states within Bonney: Tom, host personality; Satan; Mamie, Demian; Viking; Tommy, hitman; preacher; Dad, and Kathy. Each personality was described as having a distinct role related to coping with trauma. Dell testified that at the time of the killing, the personality, Demian, was in control and believed it was targeting Bonney's abusive father rather than Kathy. He argued that Bonney could not distinguish right from wrong at the time of the incident. The interviews were recorded on videotape and later used as evidence in court proceedings. In one recording, Bonney claimed that Kathy was still alive and visiting him in prison. However, prosecution psychiatrist Dr. Philip Coons criticized Dell's methods. Coons argued that the interviews were flawed, that leading questions were used, and that hypnosis may have influenced the creation of alternate personalities. He also stated that dissociative identity disorder could not be caused solely by the death of a family member. A treating physician from October 1988 acknowledged symptoms consistent with Dell's findings, but disagreed with the conclusion that Bonney was unaware of his actions. These evaluations became central to the psychological debate presented in court proceedings during the continued legal examination of Bonney's mental state. Tom Bonney's trial began on the 17th of October 1988 in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, lasting 7 weeks. The central issue during proceedings was his mental state at the time of Kathy's death. The defense argued that he was not guilty by reason of insanity due to dissociative identity disorder. Videotaped sessions from Dr. Dell's psychological evaluations were presented as key evidence. The defense maintained that the personality Damien was in control during the killing, and that Bonney lacked the ability to understand his actions or distinguish right from wrong. The prosecution challenged this position through expert testimony, particularly from Dr. Philip Coons, who criticized the diagnostic methods used. Another physician testified that while Bonney showed symptoms consistent with DID, he still understood the nature and consequences of his actions. On the 25th of November 1988, the jury found Tom Bonney guilty of first-degree murder. On November 30, he was sentenced to death. Bonney appealed the decision, and on the 12th of June 1991, the North Carolina Supreme Court upheld the conviction but voided the death sentence. The court cited improper jury instructions and acknowledged mitigating factors, including evidence of dissociative identity disorder. The case was remanded for further proceedings. A resentencing hearing began on the 24th of August 1992, but was aborted after Bonney disrupted the courtroom, resulting in a mistrial. Further psychiatric evaluation was ordered. Eventually, in October 2007, Tom Bonney was sentenced to life in prison by Camden County Superior Court. This sequence of legal proceedings reflected the continued examination of Tom Bonney's mental state, the ongoing review of psychiatric evidence, and the repeated reconsideration of sentencing outcomes across multiple courts, ultimately demonstrating how the case moved through conviction, appeal, reversal of the death penalty, mistrial. During resentencing and final imposition of life imprisonment after extended judicial review, proceedings review stage completed here. April Marie Tinsley, an 8-year-old second-grade student at Fairfield Elementary School in Fort Wayne, Indiana, went missing on the 1st of April 1988 while playing outside with 2 friends near nearby homes on Good Friday. She was also part of the children's choir at Faith United Methodist Church. That afternoon, April briefly returned home to get her umbrella and disappeared around 3 p.m., marking the start of a missing child case that would later develop into a major investigation. According to later statements made by John D. Pants, Miller, who eventually admitted responsibility, he claimed he had planned to take a child and acted after encountering April, even though he had no prior connection to her. He asked her to get into his vehicle and took her to his residence. Authorities later confirmed that she lost her life during this incident. That same night, he transported her remains to a rural area west of Spencerville, Indiana. April's mother reported her missing when she did not return home for dinner, prompting an immediate police response. Authorities in Fort Wayne launched a large-scale search involving hundreds of officers and community volunteers. Witnesses later reported seeing a man in his 30s forcing a young girl matching April's description into a blue pickup truck. This detail became a key focus for investigators as they worked to identify both the vehicle and the individual involved. Despite extensive efforts, the search did not locate April safely. The case soon shifted from a missing child investigation to a confirmed fatal case after her body was later found in a ditch west of Spencerville, Indiana. On the 4th of April 1988, a jogger discovered April Tinsley's body in a ditch just outside Spencerville, 3 days after she had gone missing. This discovery confirmed the tragic outcome feared by both investigators and the community. At the scene, investigators collected several pieces of physical evidence, including one of April's shoes and additional items found nearby in a shopping bag. These findings indicated that the incident involved serious criminal actions and suggested that materials had been left or discarded at the location. A motorist also reported seeing a blue pickup truck in the area, consistent with earlier witness descriptions from the day she disappeared. A medical examination later determined that April had been physically assaulted and had died due to restricted breathing. Experts estimated that she had passed away approximately 1 to 2 days before being found. Investigators also concluded that her body had been placed at the location only a few hours before discovery, indicating a delay between the incident and when she was left there. Following this discovery, public response intensified. On the 5th of April 1988, 2 local radio stations created reward funds to encourage anyone with information to come forward. April's memorial service was held on the 8th of April 1988 at Faith United Methodist Church, followed by her burial at Green Lawn Memorial Park. These events marked a period of mourning while authorities continued their investigation and appealed for community assistance. In the early stages of the case, Fort Wayne police explored multiple leads while working to identify the person responsible. One early suspect was a 3-4-year-old man already facing charges in an unrelated case involving a minor. Although he became part of the investigation, he was later cleared and the case remained unresolved for some time, requiring investigators to continue searching for new leads and connections within the community. Authorities also continued evaluating individuals with prior connections to child-related offenses across the region. Despite these efforts, early suspects did not produce conclusive results, and the investigation remained open without a definitive lead. The absence of strong forensic matches further complicated progress and limited the ability to narrow down investigative leads. As time passed, the case began to show signs of becoming long-term and unresolved within law enforcement efforts. Without a clear suspect profile based on DNA evidence, investigators struggled to reduce the number of viable leads. While composite sketches and witness statements provided direction, they were insufficient to identify the perpetrator responsible. This section emphasizes how early investigative tools, witness testimony, and suspect inquiries failed to solve the case. As a result, investigators became increasingly reliant on future advancements in forensic science to move the case forward. It also sets the foundation for later developments involving anonymous communications and renewed investigative attention in subsequent years. These emerging challenges underscored the difficulty of solving the case with limited technology available at the time. On the 21st of May 1990, police discovered a disturbing message written on a barn in St. Joseph Township. The message referenced the murder of April Tinsley, stating, "I kill 8-year-old April Marie Tinsley," and included threats such as, "I will kill again." The writing was done using crayons found near the scene. The discovery of this message raised concerns that the perpetrator was still active and possibly taunting law enforcement. Investigators initially considered whether this communication could be connected to other child murders in the region, including the case of 7-year-old Sarah Jean Boker, whose body was found in June 1990. This led to the formation of a joint homicide team in 1991 to examine potential connections between the cases. However, on the 7th of August 1991, the FBI Behavioral Science Unit determined that although the cases shared similarities, they were ultimately unrelated. This conclusion helped narrow investigative focus back to Tinsley's case alone. This period also marked increasing involvement from federal agencies, including behavioral profiling. The suspect was described as a white male with a sexual interest in children, likely living or working in Northeast Fort Wayne or Allen County. This phase shows how concerning messages, behavioral profiling, and cooperation between agencies expanded the investigation during the early 1990s. These developments increased pressure on investigators as each new message suggested the individual responsible may still be connected to the case, while also raising public concern in the Fort Wayne area. Law enforcement continued reviewing tips and evidence, working closely across local, state, and federal agencies as efforts remained ongoing. In 2004, several notes believed to be connected to the case were discovered in the Fort Wayne area. During Memorial Day weekend, 4 separate messages were found, 3 placed on girls' bicycles and 1 left in a mailbox. Some of these notes were accompanied by disturbing materials, including personal items and photographs showing partial images of an unidentified individual. One message directly referenced April Tinsley and claimed responsibility for her disappearance and death, while also warning others not to involve authorities. DNA recovered from the items matched an unknown profile already linked to the case, confirming a biological connection between these communications. and the original incident. This marked a major forensic breakthrough, even though the person's identity was still unknown at the time. Media coverage also helped bring renewed attention to the case. Programs like America's Most Wanted featured it in 2009, encouraging viewers to share any information. These efforts kept the case active in both public awareness and investigative systems, even as it remained unresolved. This stage highlights how the case transitioned into a long-term investigation with continued communications, physical evidence links, and growing national attention. It also shows how the case resurfaced over time, maintaining focus from law enforcement across different periods. In 2015, Parabon Nanolabs created a DNA-based composite image of the unknown individual using advanced genetic analysis. An updated version was released in 2016 to assist in public identification efforts. In May 2018, a Fort Wayne Police Department detective submitted DNA evidence to Parabon Nanolabs for further testing. Using the GED-Match genealogy database, specialists identified distant relatives connected to the unknown profile. This allowed genealogist C.C. Moore to narrow the possible identity down to 2 individuals. By the 2nd of July 2018, investigators focused on John D. Miller, a 59-year-old resident of Grabille, Indiana. Neighbors described him as quiet and withdrawn. Police later collected additional DNA evidence from discarded items linked to him, which matched the unknown profile connected to the case. On the 15th of July 2018, detectives approached Miller and asked him to come in for questioning. After being informed of his rights, he was asked if he understood why he was there. According to investigators, he responded by mentioning April Tinsley. During questioning, he admitted responsibility for her abduction and death. This phase highlights the critical role of forensic genealogy, DNA matching, and long-term investigative effort in solving a case that remained unresolved for more than 30 years. It demonstrates how advancements in DNA technology turned a decades-old mystery into a solvable investigation. It also shows how genetic databases and collaborative forensic work can reconnect evidence across time, ultimately leading from an unknown DNA profile to a confirmed individual. This resolution became a major example of how modern forensic tools can help solve long-standing cases. Following his admission, John D. Miller was formally charged in connection with April Tinsley's case. He initially pleaded not guilty in July 2018, but later changed his plea to guilty on the 7th of December 2018, accepting responsibility for her death. On the 21st of December 2018, he was sentenced to 80 years in prison. He was first placed at the Indiana Department of Correction Reception Diagnostic Center and later transferred to Newcastle Correctional Facility in 2019. His earliest possible release date was set for 2058. This section also includes the aftermath and memorial efforts honoring April's memory. In 2015, April's Garden was established in Fort Wayne as a dedicated memorial space. Additional tributes followed, keeping her memory alive within the community, including a memorial walk in 2018, a balloon release organized by April's mother, and school dedications at Fairfield Elementary School, which included a pink magnolia tree and a bench honoring her life. In 2019, investigators who worked on the case were honored with a National Policing Award for their decades-long effort to solve the case. John Miller later died of natural causes in September 2025 while still in custody. This final section concludes the outline by covering legal closure, sentencing outcomes, memorialization efforts, and the long-term impact on both the Fort Wayne community and the investigators who pursued justice for over 3 decades. The case remains a significant example of forensic genealogy solving a decades-old cold case in United States criminal justice history, overall system, and practice. Christine Marion Jessup, born on 29 November 1974, was a 9-year-old girl living in Queensville, Ontario, Canada. On 3 October 1984, her life became the focus of a missing child case in Canada. That day, her mother, Janet Jessup, and her older brother, Kenny, traveled to Toronto's East Detention Centre to visit her father, Bob Jessup, who had been in custody for misappropriation of funds. Janet believed Christine was too young for the visit and left her behind in Queensville to attend school as usual. Christine returned home after school by bus and briefly dropped her backpack at the house. Shortly afterward, she left again and was later seen at a nearby variety store between 3:30 and 4 p.m., where she bought bubble gum and left within a minute. She was also supposed to meet a friend at a nearby park, but never arrived. By the time her mother and brother returned home shortly after 4 p.m., Christine was missing. Her disappearance was officially reported later that evening. This account establishes her final confirmed movements on the day she vanished and forms the foundation of the investigation that followed. All details are based strictly on witness and family accounts provided. Following Christine Jessup's disappearance on 3 October 1984, she was officially declared missing later that evening. The immediate response focused on locating the 9-year-old after she failed to return home and did not meet her friend at a nearby park as planned. Investigators began piecing together her last known movements, relying on witness statements, including a shopkeeper who confirmed seeing Christine alone at a nearby variety store between 3:30 and 4 p.m. These early accounts helped establish a timeline of her final confirmed public sighting in Queensville, Ontario, before the search efforts expanded across the surrounding area. The initial phase of the investigation involved search efforts in and around Queensville, Ontario, as authorities attempted to trace her movements after she left home following school. The fact that she had been seen so close to her home shortly before disappearing intensified concern among investigators and community members participating in the search. Despite early search efforts, no immediate trace of Christine was found in the hours following her disappearance. The absence of physical evidence or clear leads made the early investigation particularly challenging for authorities working the case. This section focuses strictly on the documented early response and initial search timeline only. Christine Jessop's remains were discovered on 31 December, approximately 2 months after her disappearance. Her body was found in a farmer's field in Sunderland, Brock Township, around 55 kilometers east of her home. The discovery confirmed the worst outcome of the missing child investigation. Authorities determined that Christine had been abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered. Forensic examination revealed that she had been stabbed to death. Additionally, investigators found semen stains on her underwear, which became a critical piece of forensic evidence in the case. The location and condition of the remains shifted the case from a missing person investigation to a homicide investigation. The recovery site, far from her home, indicated that she had been transported after her disappearance. This section documents the confirmed forensic findings and recovery details without interpretation or speculation. It focuses on the physical evidence collected at the scene and the official determination of cause of death. The discovery marked a turning point in the investigation, intensifying efforts to identify those responsible for the crime and leading investigators to broaden their search for suspects in the months that followed. After the discovery of Christine Jessop's body, police investigations expanded significantly. By 14 February 1985, attention turned toward Christine's next-door neighbor, Guy Paul Morin. His name had been mentioned among several individuals identified during early inquiries, including input from Christine's mother. Surveillance was established at Morin's home on 19 February 1985. 3 days later, on 22 February, 2 officers interviewed him as part of the investigation. The scrutiny intensified over the following months. On 22 April 1985, Guy Paul Morin was arrested in connection with Christine Jessop's murder. This marked a major development in the case, as the investigation narrowed toward a specific suspect. This section focuses strictly on documented investigative steps leading to Morin's arrest, including surveillance, interviews, and the timeline of police action. It does not include trial outcomes or conclusions, only the early procedural developments that directed attention toward Morin in the initial phase of the homicide investigation. Guy Paul Morin's first trial for the first-degree murder of Christine Jessop began on 7 January 1986. The trial represented the first major legal proceeding in the case following his arrest in 1985. The trial represented the first major legal proceeding in the case following his arrest in 1985. During the proceedings, evidence and arguments were presented before a jury over the course of the trial. The central issue involved whether the prosecution had proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt based on the evidence available at the time. At the conclusion of the trial, Morin was acquitted of the charges. The acquittal marked the end of the first prosecution attempt against him. This section focuses exclusively on the trial's initiation and outcome, emphasizing that the jury returned a not guilty verdict in 1986. It does not include commentary or later developments, but rather the procedural outcome of the first legal attempt to convict Maureen in connection with the murder case. It focuses only on the courtroom proceedings, the presentation of evidence, and the final decision delivered by the jury after deliberation. The Crown argued that the trial judge had made an error in instructing the jury on the meaning of reasonable doubt, which they claimed affected the verdict. The Court of Appeal agreed with the Crown's position and, on 5 June 1987, ordered a new trial. Maureen challenged this decision and appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. On 17 November 1988, the Supreme Court dismissed his appeal, allowing the order for a new trial to stand. This sequence of appeals followed the initial acquittal and moved the case through Canada's appellate courts. It included the Crown's argument regarding jury instruction on reasonable doubt, the Court of Appeal's order for retrial, and the Supreme Court's final review. Each court decision represented a procedural step in the legal process, following the original trial outcome in 1986. The Supreme Court's dismissal in 1988 left the order for a new trial in place under Canadian law at that time. Guy Paul Morin's second trial began on 28 May 1990, following the appellate court's order for a retrial. This second legal proceeding revisited the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Christine Jessup. The trial continued over an extended period, examining the evidence and arguments presented by both prosecution and defense. After years of legal proceedings connected to the case, the trial reached its conclusion on 30 July 1992. At the end of the second trial, Morin was convicted of first-degree murder. This conviction marked a significant reversal from the earlier acquittal and became a central development in the Jessup case timeline. This section documents only the timeline and outcome of the second trial, focusing on the retrial process and final conviction in 1992, without referencing later exoneration or external commentary. It focuses strictly on procedural progression and courtroom outcome as recorded in official trial proceedings. It does not include commentary, interpretation, or information beyond the documented trial record of the second proceeding. All details remain limited to the retrial timeline, legal process, and final verdict delivered by the court in 1992. Following Guy Paul Morin's conviction, public and legal responses began to emerge. A grassroots organization called the Justice for Guy Paul Morin Committee was formed to support his efforts toward exoneration. The committee's initial focus was to assist Morin in appealing his conviction and to seek his release on bail while awaiting further legal proceedings. On 9 February 1993, Morin was granted bail. After this development, the committee expanded its mandate and reorganized itself into the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted, AIDWC, now known as Innocence Canada. The organization broadened its mission beyond Morin's case to support others who may have been wrongly convicted in Canada. On 23 January 2000, 995, nearly a decade after his initial arrest, Guy Paul Morin was exonerated through DNA testing that was not previously available. This scientific evidence overturned his conviction in the Jessup case. Following this exoneration, in February 1995, the Ontario Attorney General's Office transferred the case from the Durham Regional Police to the Toronto Police. A special 9-member task force was formed and interviewed over 300 suspects in an effort to identify the real perpetrator. Despite extensive investigative work, the task force was disbanded in March of the same year without identifying a suspect. The real killer remained unknown for decades. It was not until 2020 that investigators used genetic genealogy to link DNA evidence from the crime scene to Calvin Hoover, who had died by suicide in 2015. On 26 June 1996, a formal commission was established to investigate the proceedings involving Guy Paul Morin. Led by Fred Kaufman, QC, the inquiry examined the police investigation, forensic evidence handling, and the criminal proceedings. Hearings began on 10 February 1997 and lasted 146 days, involving 120 witnesses and over 100,000 pages of documents. On 9 April 1998, the final report was released in 2 volumes, totaling 1,380 pages, and containing 119 recommendations. The report concluded that while no individual intended to convict an innocent person, a staggering tunnel vision influenced the investigation and prosecution. It defined tunnel vision as an overly narrow focus on a single theory affecting objectivity. In 2020, the real killer was officially identified as Calvin Hoover. Records show he was a friend of the Jessup family and had close personal and work connections, including employment overlap with Christine's father. Hoover was never questioned during the original investigation, despite references in the case file. He died in 2015, and his DNA match was confirmed through genetic genealogy using preserved forensic samples. On the 14th of September 2001, an unidentified man, later known as Lyle Stevick, arrived in Amanda Park, Washington, by bus and checked into the Quinault Inn under an alias. During registration, he provided a false home address that was later traced to a Best Western hotel in Meridian, Idaho, though staff there did not recognize him when shown his photograph during the investigation. The motel clerk later described the man as possibly Canadian due to his speech and accent, although this was never confirmed. The use of the alias led investigators to speculate that the name Lyle Stevick may have been taken from a character in Joyce Carol Oates' novel You Must Remember This, 1987, a character associated with suicidal contemplation. After checking in, he paid for one night's stay and stated he planned to remain for a few more days, a detail that later became significant in reconstructing the timeline of his final days. At this stage, Nothing in his behavior raised immediate alarm, and his identity remained completely unknown, marking the beginning of the documented timeline leading to his death 2 days later. His arrival by bus and registration under the alias Lyle Stevick marked the first recorded point in the investigation, establishing a brief and unusual timeline at the Kinnaul Inn, where his identity remained entirely concealed while he moved through check-in, payment, and room assignment without drawing attention from staff or other guests. This moment begins the documented timeline leading to his later death in 2001. Between September 14 and the 16th of September 2001, the man, later known as Lyle Stevick, was seen during his short stay at the Kinnaul Inn in Amanda Park, Washington. Witness accounts suggest he was observed walking back and forth near the side of a nearby highway, although it is unclear whether this occurred before or after he checked into the motel, leaving uncertainty about his state of mind. At one point during his stay, he requested a change of room due to outside noise, and the motel accommodated him by assigning a different room. This interaction represents one of the few recorded social exchanges during his stay at the inn. He spent much of his time alone inside the room, with no reported visitors or phone calls documented by investigators. Investigators later noted he had no luggage, carrying only basic items such as a toothbrush and toothpaste. His clothing consisted of a blue plaid shirt, a grey t-shirt underneath, blue jeans, and black boots. The man appeared isolated and transient, with no confirmed interactions that revealed his identity or background during his stay. His behavior did not trigger any intervention, and he remained largely unnoticed by other guests and staff at the motel. These final movements form the limited known activity leading up to his death on or around the 16th of September 2001, showing a brief and silent presence within the motel that left no clear indication of identity and temps or explanation before he was found after his passing was confirmed later. Inside the Kinnaul Inn in Amanda Park, Washington, the man, later known as Lyle Stevick, died by suicide inside his motel room. Investigators believe the death occurred on Sunday, the 16th of September 2001, when he used his belt tied to a bar inside the closet. His body was discovered the following day, confirming the timeline of his final hours in the motel room. Before his death, he took deliberate steps, closing the blinds and lining the closet area with pillows. The careful arrangement of the room and financial preparations contrasted with his unknown identity, marking a deeply isolated end. This sequence of events left investigators with a detailed but incomplete picture of his final hours, where financial preparation, room arrangement, and written notes contrasted sharply with his unknown identity, and no clear explanation emerged for why he ended his life in the motel. Inside the Kinnaul Inn room, investigators documented almost no luggage or identifying documents, reinforcing the mystery surrounding the man's identity. Only a toothbrush and toothpaste were recovered as personal items. The man wore a blue plaid shirt layered over a grey t-shirt, blue jeans, and black boots. His jeans appeared relatively large compared to his body, suggesting recent significant weight loss of up to 40 pounds. The room showed intentional preparation, with blinds closed and the closet area lined with pillows to isolate the act. Investigators found handwritten material, including a note reading suicide and repeated writing of the same word in the trash. The combination of financial preparation room arrangement and minimal belongings suggested a transient, deliberate, and extremely isolated profile. Despite extensive forensic evidence collected at the scene, none of it immediately revealed his identity. Despite the detailed evidence recovered, including clothing analysis, room arrangement, and handwritten notes, investigators were unable to link the man to any known identity at the time of examination. The lack of luggage or official documents further complicated efforts to determine his background or origin. Every piece of physical evidence pointed to careful preparation and isolation. Yet, none provided a name or confirmed history. The scene ultimately reflected a highly transient individual whose presence left minimal trace beyond the room itself. Even with forensic collection, including fingerprints, dental records, and DNA, no immediate matches were found in available databases, leaving the identity unresolved despite extensive investigative work at the scene at that time. Post-mortem examination of the man later known as Lyle Stevick was conducted following the discovery of his body inside the Quinault Inn in Amanda Park, Washington. He was described as fair-skinned, with black hair and green or hazel eyes, with an estimated age between 20 and 30 years, though some assessments suggested he could have been up to 35 years old, placing his possible birth year between 1966 and 1981. DNA analysis revealed complex ancestry, including at least 1/4 Native American and 1/4 Hispanic or Spanish heritage, while additional assessments suggested possible African American ancestry as well. Physical identifiers included a mole on his chin, attached earlobes, and an old appendectomy scar, while dental records showed evidence of previous orthodontic treatment, including braces. The autopsy revealed no signs of fatal disease, despite earlier speculation that illness may have contributed to his death, and the most notable observation was significant recent weight loss of up to 40 pounds. Because of the short time between death and discovery, investigators collected fingerprints, dental records, and DNA samples in good condition and entered them into international databases including CODIS, but no matches were found. This biological profile became central to the investigation. Yet, despite detailed forensic analysis, it failed to produce a match or reveal his identity for many years. This combination of detailed biological evidence and preserved forensic material provided investigators with a strong scientific profile for comparison. Yet, despite long-term efforts across multiple databases and agencies, no identification was made, leaving the case unresolved for many years. Following the examination in years following, early investigative efforts focused on identifying the man, later known as Lyle Stevick, through fingerprints, dental records, and DNA collected after his body was discovered. Authorities entered these identifiers into national and international databases in an attempt to establish a match with existing records. Despite these efforts, no matches were found across available systems, leaving the man unidentified. Investigators believed he may have traveled from nearby areas such as Aberdeen or Port Angeles based on bus routes serving Amanda Park. However, no bus drivers or staff recognized him during inquiries conducted by law enforcement. 2 missing persons cases, Alexander Craig and Stephen Needham, were considered, but ultimately ruled out as matches. The false address he provided led investigators to a Best Western hotel in Meridian, Idaho, where staff also failed to identify him. In April 2007, the case was highlighted as the Profile of the Month by Missing from the Circle, an initiative focused on unidentified Native American cases. Despite increased attention, the case remained unsolved. Over time, investigators speculated about his background, including the possibility he may have come from a non-English speaking country due to limited identifying information and unclear travel patterns. However, none of these theories were confirmed. The lack of missing persons reports matching his profile further complicated the case, as his family believed he had voluntarily estranged himself and did not file a report afterward. Despite fingerprints, DNA, and dental records being entered into global databases, no matches were found. The case remained one of many unidentified decedents in Washington state during this period. The absence of a missing persons report significantly slowed identification efforts across multiple agencies. His family believed he had chosen to cut contact and was living elsewhere, so no official report was ever filed. During this period, investigators continued limited efforts to match the case, but technological limitations slowed progress. The case was later revisited through public awareness efforts and inclusion in missing persons initiatives. The lack of progress highlighted the challenges of identifying individuals without missing reports or prior database records. Even though the man's biological data was preserved, it remained unlinked to any known identity. For nearly 2 decades, Lyle Stevick remained a name without a face or confirmed history in official records. This long-term uncertainty underscored how unidentified death cases can persist for decades, even when strong forensic evidence is available. Despite preserved fingerprints, DNA profiles, and dental records, the absence of any matching missing persons report prevented investigators from making a connection to a living identity. Over time, the case became an example of the difficulties faced when biological data exists without corresponding personal records in national or international systems. Even with continued review, the case remained unresolved for nearly 20 years after his death in Washington state records and databases unchanged status. 2 genealogists from the DNA Doe Project, Colleen M. Fitzpatrick and Margaret Press, uploaded the man's DNA profile to GED Match in an attempt to identify relatives. They discovered a cluster of genetic matches in Idaho and New Mexico, likely distant relatives separated by 2 to 3 generations. Through genealogical mapping, they were able to narrow down potential family lines and eventually locate members of his birth family. On the 8th of May 2018, the Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Office announced that the man known as Lyle Stevick had been identified after nearly 17 years. The identification was confirmed through DNA comparison and matching of genetic relatives, as well as fingerprint comparison with childhood records provided by the family. Authorities notified the family, who had believed he was still alive but estranged. Due to the sensitive nature of the case, the family requested that his identity not be made public. The identification closed a long-standing unidentified case, but left the circumstances of his death and personal struggles largely unresolved. The man was later buried in an unmarked grave at Fernhill Cemetery in Aberdeen, Washington, marking the end of his unidentified status, but not the mystery of his final days. Although the case was no longer classified as unidentified after the genetic genealogy breakthrough, investigators noted the underlying circumstances surrounding his final days in the motel room remained unresolved, leaving only his identity confirmed, while many personal questions about his life persisted. On the 18th of November 1987, Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg began what was intended to be a short, routine overnight trip from British Columbia to Washington State. The couple left Canada together with a simple plan: travel to Seattle, spend a night there, and return home shortly afterward. Their journey began by ferrying from British Columbia into Washington State, marking the start of what appeared to be an ordinary cross-border trip. Jay Cook, 20, and Tanya Van Cuylenborg, 18, were in a committed relationship and were described as responsible young individuals with stable personal lives. Tanya's parents were aware of the trip and even assisted in preparing for it, reinforcing that nothing about their departure raised concern. The couple traveled in a brown van, following a planned route south of the ferry, landing after entering Washington State. At this stage, there were no signs of distress or unusual circumstances reported. The trip was consistent with a short recreational visit between two nearby regions. The last known moment when both individuals were together at the start of their journey. From this point forward, their movements would become increasingly uncertain, and within a short period, all communication and contact would cease entirely. After arriving in Washington State, Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg were last confirmed to be alive between November 18 and 19, 1987. During this time, they were seen traveling through the region in their brown van, continuing south of the ferry landing, as originally planned. No immediate issues were reported, and their route suggested they were still following their intended schedule toward Seattle. However, at some point during this journey, something went wrong. The couple never arrived at their destination, and they failed to return home as expected. Their disappearance was not immediately explained, but it quickly became clear that they had gone completely off the radar. There were no further confirmed sightings after this brief window, and no communication was received from either of them. The lack of information created immediate concern once they missed their expected return timeline. Their disappearance would later span 2 countries, as investigators in both Washington State and British Columbia began attempts to trace their final movements. This section highlights the critical transition from a normal travel plan to an unexplained disappearance. From this point onward, Jay and Tanya would not be seen alive again, and mystery surrounding their whereabouts deepened following days. Tanya van Cuylenborg was 18 years old at the time of her disappearance. She lived in British Columbia and was described as energetic, kind, and full of life. She maintained close relationships with her family and was considered responsible and dependable. Tanya had a bright future ahead of her and was not known for risky behavior or sudden absences. Her decision to travel with Jay Cook was part of a planned short trip, and her family was aware of the journey in advance. This reinforces that her disappearance was entirely unexpected. She was not known to have any conflicts or issues that would explain her sudden vanishing. Her personality and lifestyle, as described in the background, do not indicate any reason for her to disappear voluntarily or without communication. This section focuses on establishing Tanya's normal life before the trip, emphasizing the contrast between her stable background and the sudden, unexplained end of contact. After November 1987, her disappearance became especially painful for her family due to her close relationships and the lack of any warning signs. Her life in British Columbia reflected stability, routine, and strong family connections, making her disappearance even more difficult to comprehend for those closest to her, especially as there were no indications of distress prior to the trip or any known reasons for her sudden disappearance from contact after November. 1987, as reported in the provided case background. Information for this section summary. Continuation. Jay Cook was a 20-year-old man from Sarnik, British Columbia. He was described as easygoing, responsible, and calm in personality. He maintained steady employment and was viewed by friends and family as dependable and caring. Jay was in a serious relationship with Tanya van Cuylenborg, and the two planned the trip to Seattle together as a short break from routine life. Their relationship appears to have been stable and well known to their families. Like Tanya, Jay had no known involvement in dangerous activity or behavior that would suggest risk. His decision to travel with Tanya was consistent with a normal personal relationship and recreational travel. This section highlights Jay's background to establish his normal life circumstances before the disappearance. It also reinforces that both individuals were ordinary young adults whose trip was planned and known, making their sudden disappearance even more alarming for investigators and families. His life in British Columbia reflected stability, routine, and strong family connections, which made the sudden disappearance difficult for those who knew him. It emphasized the contrast between his normal daily existence and the unexplained end of contact after November 1987, as investigators later reviewed the case background and family accounts that confirmed no prior warning signs or behavioral change. The trip to Washington state began for both individuals. On the 24th of November 1987, hunters made a disturbing discovery in a rural area near a gravel pit in Snohomish County, Washington. They found the body of a young woman who was later identified as Tanya Van Kuylenborg. Investigators determined that Tanya had been sexually assaulted and strangled before being left in a remote location. The condition and placement of her body indicated intentional disposal in an isolated area away from immediate public view. Near the crime scene, investigators recovered critical physical evidence. Although the background does not specify exact details of every item collected, it confirms that biological material and other evidence were present and later preserved for future forensic analysis. The discovery confirmed that Tanya's disappearance was the result of a violent crime rather than an accident or voluntary absence. It also marked the beginning of a homicide investigation spanning multiple jurisdictions. This section focuses on the first confirmed crime scene and establishes the nature of the offense against Tanya. It highlights the severity of the crime and the fact that evidence was collected and preserved, which would later become crucial decades afterward when forensic technology advanced. Evidence preservation ensured the case could be revisited years later in time. After Tanya's body was found, Jay Cook remained missing for a period of time. Days later, his body was discovered in a separate location in Skagit County, Washington, approximately 100 miles away from where Tanya was found. Jay had been shot in the head and left in a wooded area. The separation between the two crime scenes indicated that the victims were disposed of in different locations, suggesting deliberate planning by the offender. The distance between the two sites and the differing methods used in each death suggested controlled and intentional actions. This indicated that the offender did not act randomly, but instead took time to manage each crime scene separately. Jay's discovery confirmed that both individuals had been murdered, and it expanded the investigation across a wider geographic region. Law enforcement now had 2 homicide scenes to analyze, each with its own set of physical evidence. This section emphasizes the second confirmed crime scene and highlights the significance of the geographic separation and differing methods of killing. It reinforced how complex the investigation would become as detectives worked to connect 2 separate scenes across a wide geographic area while preserving all available forensic evidence for future analysis review process. Following the discovery of both victims, law enforcement launched a large-scale investigation across Washington state and British Columbia. Authorities collected evidence from both crime scenes, including biological material, hair samples, fibers, tire tracks, and latent fingerprints. Witness reports also provided information about the brown van used by the couple during their trip. Despite these leads, investigators were unable to identify a clear suspect in the early stages of the case. At the time, DNA technology was extremely limited, preventing investigators from making definitive matches using biological evidence. Although physical evidence was preserved, it could not be fully utilized with the scientific tools available in the late 1980s. As a result, the investigation stalled over time. Despite extensive efforts, no suspect could be conclusively linked to the crimes, and the case eventually went cold. This section focuses on the early investigative phase, highlighting both the amount of evidence collected and the technological limitations that prevented resolution. The preserved evidence, however, would later become critical decades later. It remained stored securely by investigators, allowing future forensic advancements to re-examine the case when DNA technology eventually improved and genetic genealogy methods became available decades after the original investigation had stalled in later years. In the years following the murders, the families of Jay Cook and Tanya van Cuylenborg continued to seek answers. Each passing year brought renewed grief and uncertainty, as no resolution had been reached. Anniversaries of the disappearance and deaths remained emotionally difficult, and occasional leads provided temporary hope, but did not result in breakthroughs. The case became a long-standing example of an unresolved double homicide, despite the passage of time. Evidence from the crime scenes was preserved by investigators. Authorities maintained hope that future advancements in forensic science might eventually provide answers. This section highlights the emotional and psychological impact on the families, as well as the persistence of investigators in preserving evidence for future use. Over time, the absence of answers left a lasting emotional burden on both families, who continued to live with uncertainty while holding on to hope that one day the case would be solved through advances in forensic science and renewed investigative efforts. The investigation remained open in the background of law enforcement priorities, as preserved evidence ensured that the case could be revisited whenever new scientific tools became available, keeping the possibility of future resolution alive for decades, for families and investigators still ongoing. In 2018, investigators applied genetic genealogy to the preserved DNA evidence from the crime scenes. This method compares crime scene DNA with public ancestry databases to identify potential relatives of suspects. For the first time in decades, the preserved biological evidence was analyzed using modern technology. The results did not immediately identify a suspect, but instead pointed toward a family line connected to the offender. This lead directed investigators toward William Earl Talbot II, a truck driver living in Washington state. He had no known connection to the victims, but genetic evidence suggested a strong link. To confirm the findings, investigators collected discarded items from Talbot for DNA testing. The results matched the crime scene evidence, confirming his connection to the case. This section explains the scientific breakthrough that reopened the case and led directly to a suspect after more than 30 years of uncertainty. The use of genetic genealogy represented a major shift in forensic investigation, allowing decades-old cases to be re-examined with modern scientific tools. In this case, It transformed previously unusable evidence into a decisive lead that connected preserved DNA to a specific individual, ultimately reopening the investigation after more than 3 decades of investigation progress, of ongoing investigation progress. In May 2018, William Earl Talbot II was arrested in connection with the murders of Jay Cook and Tanya van Cuylenborg. The arrest shocked the public due to the long passage of time and the ordinary nature of the suspect's life. During the trial in 2019, prosecutors presented DNA evidence linking Talbot to the crime scene, along with physical evidence, location data, and expert testimony on genetic genealogy. The defense argued that the DNA evidence alone was insufficient and raised concerns about potential contamination and gaps in the timeline. However, the jury found the prosecution's evidence more convincing. After deliberation, Talbot was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. This section covers the legal proceedings and highlights the central role of DNA evidence in securing a conviction. Following the verdict, the case marked a significant moment in the use of forensic science, reinforcing how DNA evidence can resolve cold cases even after decades of uncertainty. It also demonstrated the growing impact of genetic genealogy in modern investigations, showing how preserved evidence can be reanalyzed with new technology to produce definitive results in long unsolved crimes, bringing long-awaited closure to a decades-old investigation for the families involved affected finally. In July 2019, William Earl Talbot II was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders of Jay Cook and Tanya van Cuylenborg. The case became a landmark example of how genetic genealogy can solve decades-old cold cases. It demonstrated that preserved evidence can still lead to justice even after many years. While the conviction brought legal closure, the families continued to experience emotional loss. The answers they had waited decades for did not erase the pain of the tragedy. This final section emphasizes the resolution of the case, its impact on forensic science, and the lasting emotional consequences for those affected. It reinforced the role of modern DNA analysis in solving cold cases that remained unresolved for decades across jurisdictions. It also highlighted how preserved biological evidence can retain investigative value even after many years in storage. The case stands as an example of how advances in forensic science can reopen long-forgotten investigations and provide answers previously thought impossible. For the families, the resolution brought accountability, but could not remove the emotional weight carried over decades. It remains a reminder that justice can arrive late, yet still reshape understanding of cold cases, and continues to influence investigative methods used in similar cases today across North America, law enforcement agencies, and forensic teams globally.